recognizing what those legal services you need and when you're going to need them, and budgeting appropriate for that is going to allow your business hopefully to survive and eventually thrive.
This is the kind of conversation I wish I had, like when I started my business. What are the main things that startup founders need to think about with respect to term sheets?
Yeah, I think when you're looking at term sheets, you have to appreciate that, the term sheet itself probably was drafted by an attorney for the investor who's coming in. And so you want to have an attorney on your side look at it from the perspective of the business. And you may want to have an attorney look at it from your personal perspective as well. And those are different interests. And like the example I talked about earlier, we were representing the company and made it very clear to all of the owners of the business that we're not representing you. We're going to represent the company, and we're going to advocate for the best interests of the company in terms of cash flow and how this is going to work. And so in a term sheet, you really have multiple parties with different interests being represented there. You have the investor's interests, you have the company's interests, and then you have the individual founder's interests as well. And those are different. And so recognizing that inherent conflict of interest and getting legal counsel so that you're comfortable from the business perspective and from the individual founder's perspective that the term sheet is going to work for you is super important. And I think, within the term sheet, there are a lot of variables that can be manipulated to the advantage of one party or another. A lot of times founders will rush in to take the money and not appreciate maybe what can happen with a further dilution of their interests or vesting periods. I mean, there's a lot of terms that can work against them if they're not fully appreciating what is in there and how this can play out. And so I would always recommend clients think about best case scenario and worst case scenario. Probably neither one of those is going to happen, but make sure you go through that thought process and then recognize it's probably going to be somewhere in between, and get comfortable with the legal advice you're getting for the company and for you individually.
Oh, that's such a stoic answer. I'm gonna press you for something a little bit of fun. What would you say are the top 3 clauses or things that startup founders have to be aware of? For example, vesting periods, who gets paid out first, like where if they get this sense that something smells a little funny, what should they read first to get an indication of how things are going?
Yeah, I think vesting period, also ownership of intellectual property rights, how that's going to be held. Vesting definitely is huge because the founders need to know how long they're going to have to stay in this business to get their money out. Also, dilution of their interests over time, because additional investment probably is going to be needed down the road. And when that happens, they're going to lose more of their share of the company. And ultimately control over the direction of the company is usually, in the term sheet somewhere, somehow, and recognizing that when you start taking other people's money, you're going to lose some of your independence. And how that's going to happen, whether that's board seats that are going to be appointed by the investors, and hopefully that's all good, right? I mean, ideally, you're getting money from somebody who's going to help your business and actually take an interest in it and give you good advice and position you for success. But that doesn't always happen, as we know. And so, there's a lot to that, and a lot of moving parts, and super important to get good counsel when you're going through that process.
I just wanted to say, this is the kind of conversation I wish I had. Like when I started my business, I was just like, so many questions that you just kind of had to work your way through without any advice, because you just didn't have the money, right? You didn't,
right.
Like I couldn't call a lawyer and be like, listen, I've got all of these questions. Could you please just give me an hour or 2 of your time to help me figure out when I need a lawyer, how I need a lawyer, what is it exactly that I need a lawyer for? Like, because you get into that space when you're sort of early days in your business, you're thinking, okay, I know I need a good contract in order to be able to sell stuff, right? Like, I don't want to sell a product or a service and then get that wrong, kind of thing. And I just want to say thanks for taking the time. It's really been illuminating.
Oh, it's been good. Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. So thank you.
No, more than welcome. So I guess the next bit, and this is kind of a trigger question for a lot of people, and I've seen some people burnt by this, some people not, and it actually strikes quite close to home for a lot of people in terms of how do you secure your IP? And we're talking tech products here, and a lot of startup founders, I feel, are concerned about sharing too much when it comes to pitch, or not sharing enough when they're looking to raise capital, or sharing too much when they're trying to just sell their product and get users, right? How do you protect your IP, secure your IP, and even your brand name? Should you even care in the early instances? I mean, where do you land on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you should care about it, especially if you're planning to build something over a long period of time. And it really goes back to, some of the things we talked about, which is what is the value proposition of the IP? Like, how unique is it? Do you have a brand you want to build in a specific location? So jurisdictionally, like, where do you need an IP lawyer? Do you need one in the US? Do you need one in the EU, Canada? And then maybe you need them in all those places, right? So cannot emphasize enough that you need to talk to an IP attorney. And we have some great IP attorneys in the firm, and there are great IP attorneys around the world, but you have to have one that understands your business model, what you're hoping to do with that IP going forward. When you come to business valuation issues, the IP is going to be a big part of it. And how that IP is owned, how it's licensed, that could potentially be a huge revenue generator for you. So, anybody in technology working through a startup needs to understand what their IP potentially could be worth, how to protect it, and make sure that they're taking the right steps to protect it on a regular basis. It's not a fire and forget. This is something you want to revisit frequently, I think.
Okay, I'm gonna push you on this one a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
What should a startup founder in the emerging technology space, we're talking Web3, we're talking AI, what should they have locked down, like from the very instance, from when they start trying to get customers? What are the key phrases or documents they should look to have drawn up? Also,
Well, I mean, if they think that they have a unique process that they can get a patent, and this is where they want to talk to an attorney who will tell them, like, what you're doing is unique and there is something here that we can protect, then by all means, get that done and get that locked up as soon as you can. And that's where, again, having the right attorney in the right jurisdiction advise you on that is super important. Most of these startups are trying to do something unique. I think, otherwise they wouldn't be in business, right? So what is that unique thing that you're bringing to the table that the market hasn't seen before? What is it that makes your process or your blending of the different technologies something that not anybody could do, right? This is what is your unique value proposition? And typically there's going to be some IP components to that. So understanding that, being able to articulate it, and having an attorney who is an IP attorney in the jurisdictions you're working in and can help you protect those things is important.
And just a quick follow up to that one: should startup founders be scared of the big bad? Big bad corporate trying to steal my idea. Should they just go for it and try and get some traction, and then just think about that later? Should they do it from the outset? And I know that's a very wide question, but in general.
No, I think it's good to be paranoid in this situation. But there are limits to that. And eventually you're going to have to take some business decisions about who you share that information with. And you're not going to get an investor who, you don't tell them what your unique selling proposition is. Like, you have to be able to communicate to people what it is you're doing. And you should be concerned about somebody taking your IP. But that goes back to understanding from your IP attorney, what do we do when somebody steals our IP? Are we going to have to litigate? What are the chances of that? What is it going to cost? How long is it going to take? Do you have that as a line item in your budget? If you're fiercely going to protect your IP, you should have some money allotted for litigating over IP rights. And if you don't, then maybe you're not that serious about your IP. I don't know. I mean, it's hard when you're a startup, but you have to be thinking next round, because you're going to be going back for funding again and again. Um, when and where you protect your IP and what resources you dedicate to it needs to be part of your business plan.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask a question on this? Because I see a lot of back and forth on NDAs when it comes to pitch decks for venture capital. And I've seen like yays and nays on it. I think the general consensus is like, we don't have time to sign an NDA, and don't worry, we're not going to steal your idea kind of perspective. What is your take on that?
That's a tough one, because I
know.
You can see both sides. Look, as an attorney, I'm always going to tell you to have a very good NDA and have it locked down. That's my advice. I do see situations where people are like, look, we're not going to sign an NDA, so don't even bother sending it to us if we're going to invest in you. Some of that comes down to just character judgment and your track record with the investors, and what other people might know about them. Fortunately, in this day and age, people who don't treat other people well usually will leave a trail of bodies in their wake. So do your due diligence. Anytime you're talking to somebody about your very precious business ideas and your intellectual property, either get an NDA in place that you understand and you recognize what the limitations are, or if you're not going to get an NDA in place, do some background check. And that's some of the work that we can do for clients too, is we can do a search on a person, an entity. How many lawsuits have they been involved in? What is their track record? What do some of their business associates say about them? Having that kind of intelligence helps you make an informed decision. And certainly you wouldn't want to just plunge in blindly and give somebody all of your IP, because who knows what could happen to that, right? It could take a walk, and you could end up competing against somebody who has the exact same IP that you have. I think it pays to be a little bit paranoid. Ultimately, it's going to come down to a business judgment, but have an informed decision, whatever you do.
Yeah, I like that. And I just want to add before we go to the next point, like from our company, we proactively send NDAs with our clients. So if our clients come like, hey, we want to build software, we're like, hey, great first conversation. Here's an NDA. We're also very happy to sign yours, but here's an NDA just to make sure that we're at least looking at trustworthy, and we're covered so far, right? Like, we're not going to steal our clients' ideas, because we're in no means, like, I think, looking forward to raise a large amount of capital for an idea that's not us. But we also see that clients generally are very glad about it. Like, oh, that's nice that you think of that. Some of them, they say like, oh, we don't need it, but some of them are like, yeah, we're very happy, or actually say like, hey, we only want our NDA signed. To your point, right? Like, as I probably have a good lawyer that says, no. Only sign our NDAs. So that's great. We are, the next advice piece that we already talked about it. It's like the most disputed topics. It's basically, you just said like litigation, right? Like that's the thing that you've seen coming over your desk most.
Yeah, and I think when you think about where your litigation risks are, think about where the money is, because that's where you're going to have it. It doesn't make sense to litigate for most things. And I do try to talk clients out of litigation as often as I can. But when it's about a large sum of money, it's almost always going to make sense to litigate. So you have to understand that mindset as well, that there is a point in time where you have to litigate. There's just too much riding on it. And understanding what that threshold is for you and for your business is important before you get involved in it, because a lot of times people get wrapped up in emotions and start making decisions that are not rational around litigation, and then end up regretting that and having to drop the litigation later. If you're going to get involved in litigation, you should have a clear understanding of how much time it's going to take, how much money it's going to take, and what your risks are, and the resources that you're going to deploy into it need to be weighed against the risk of losing, and understanding, that this is worthwhile to litigate or not. And understanding that quickly is going to be very, very helpful.
Perfect. The next one, I think we discussed it as well, is like how much attention should a founder pay to contracts? Is downloading them from Rocket Lawyer enough? Like we already said, like the moment you need to draw up a contract, it's probably good that you're talking to a lawyer, right?
Yeah, it's good to talk to a lawyer. And again, think about the gravity of the contract. Is it a six-figure contract or not? So understanding where you want to have an attorney spend the time and money. Is this something that's actually critical for the business? Yes. And is it a lot of money? Yes. Then okay, let's get a lawyer in here. And understanding the impact of those contracts and where you want to deploy lawyers is very important.
So the last two, and then we're moving on. How should startup founders navigate conflict of interest, like, from your perspective?
I think that they need to be aware of conflicts of interest. First of all, I think a lot of times they just consider all the co-founders are in this together. We're all doing this. We're all pulling for the company, and we're all going in the same direction. And reality is that's just not true. Even in a completely equal distribution of equity, which is rare. Individuals have different skill sets, and some skill sets are more replaceable than others, and some skill sets are more in demand than others. Some people just have a unique thing about them, an X factor that is going to make the business go. Recognizing all of that and recognizing the differences is important, and that there are going to be inherent conflicts of interest. And the business has a different interest as well. I mean, the business is there to make money and to return capital to the investors, and that may not line up with all of the co-founders' intent or capabilities at the beginning as well. So just taking a step back and trying to be objective, I think would probably be the advice, to really think about conflicts of interest from an objective viewpoint, which is hard when you're in it, but very important skill to have.
This is also a piece that is not fire and forget, but continuously evolving.
Yes, it evolves over time for sure, because people change over time, right? And business interests change over time.
All right. So that one business developer becomes a CTO and actually turns out to be really good at it. That might just be the case, right? Sorry, Charlie.
No, I was just I'm just super keen on this last question, which we had come in, which is how much should companies budget for legal? And I was going to qualify that. Let's say you raise $500,000, $1 million,
I want to do the same.
and $2 million, because those are the instances I see most frequently, especially specifically geared to our audience, right? They're right at the beginning of their journey. If you raise $500,000, what should you put aside?
I want to add one more tier to this, and that's something that you sometimes forget, Charlie, but that's our audience that bootstraps.
Ah, right.
So the bootstrapping. So the bootstrapping, $500,000, $1 million, $2 million. I think those are like 4 categories. I think that is perfect to have some insight on.
Great question. And I think you have to think about what scope of services you're going to be requiring. So if you're going to be going out and hiring an attorney to look at all of your term sheets, you're going to be hiring an attorney to look at all your employment docs, hiring an attorney to look at all your IP interests. That is probably not all going to take place on day one, right? So figure out the scope of legal services you need and when you're going to need them, and be strategic about it, because you don't want to be deploying your resources out of order. So you need to be thinking about it from the perspective of what is the first, second, third, fourth, fifth legal service I'm going to need this year, and start with that. And just like any good startup, you're going to use iterative decision making and go through that process. But I think, realistically, you're going to want to spend money on legal services, probably more than you think. Just to avoid getting destroyed by either litigation from a third party or somebody inside the company, or from a government agency that you are, violating their compliance rules. So those are the things you have to think about. You want your business to survive, and you can skimp on a lot of things in starting up, but I think skimping on legal services, I've seen it destroy a lot of startups. And so recognizing what those legal services you need and when you're going to need them, and budgeting appropriate for that is going to allow your business hopefully to survive and eventually thrive. But you've got to get to that terminal velocity at some point, and you're not going to get there by skimping on legal services. At least that's been my experience.
So if I would say, let's say, 10% for bootstrap, 20% for 500K, 30% for $1 million, would that be realistic, or and obviously we're doing a little bit of guesswork here, right? Based on, we didn't specify the industry and the company and the product, but because I can imagine that if you're bootstrapping, it's like kind of POC. You throw it on the market, you see what happens. Like you probably don't need a lot of legal services, whereas like you're just raised 2 million and you're gonna, I don't know, take on Ticketmaster, for instance, and as an example, you're probably going to need a lot of legal, right?
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think that's the important thing is for you to understand when you're going to need legal services and what type of legal services you're going to need, and that's going to help you with the budgeting. And again, order of operations, like, do you need that in the first quarter, the second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter? When are you going to be engaging legal for legal spend? If you have a proof of concept, maybe you want to spend some money early on with an IP attorney that you can grow with, right? And try to just understand what's going to happen. And with a good lawyer or law firm you're working with, they can help you navigate that. Say, okay, right now you need these services from us. Come back to us next quarter. We'll talk about these services, and here's what we think that's going to look like. And go through a process just like you would in engineering. Anything you want to have, sort of milestones that you're going to hit, and you want to have a schedule, and you want to resource load that schedule. The same way with lawyer, you got to project manage your lawyers. Basically, is what you need to do if you're going to do it the right way.